several times what I think of the Detroit Lions draft. I really try not to make a judgment until I see these guys play. We'll see, who knows? But I gotta tell you, there's a part of me that just envies these guys. Because I'm thinking, man, I would have loved to have been drafted by an NFL team, with the excitement and the joy. And then I think, to be drafted by an NFL team, that means my height and my weight would be put out there for everyone in the world to see. And I think, nah, I'm good. I'm out. But I think what's cool about this weekend for these guys who are drafted for the NFL, it's, a team notices them and calls them and tells them they're being drafted, and it's because they've seen their good qualities, what makes them a good player, and they have hope that this guy could be a good NFL player. And it seems very appropriate to mention that because here we are on Good Shepherd Sunday talking about World Day of Prayer for Vocations and how the Lord calls us to follow him. And, I think the Lord calls us, right? He calls us, and because he notices our goodness, he sees our goodness, and he has this, I know you can be a great saint, right? So it's a very similar type of thing going on here. I know this homily is going to be a little bit more on the priesthood, but I think there are takeaways for all of us. But I feel compelled to do it, to talk about priesthood, because as the Director of Priestly Vocations on World Day of Prayer for Vocations, where we're asked to specifically pray for priests, kind of feels wrong for me not to. But here are some takeaways for Good Shepherd Sunday that I think we can all reflect on and as we encourage a culture of vocations. The first is this, it's quite simple. Jesus invites, he never coerces. You've heard me say this before, but it's important for us to really emphasize that Jesus invites, he never coerces. When we think of Jesus as shepherd, he's a different kind of shepherd. Many shepherds, traditionally they use dogs or any type of animal to help gather their sheep. But Jesus is different. He doesn't use an animal. It's simply this. He uses his voice. He calls his sheep together. So Jesus doesn't use some outward force to force the sheep to gather. He simply just calls. He invites. And I have to say for you, my experience was like this. When I first felt called to become a priest, it wasn't a demand. It wasn't, Stephen, you must be a priest. It was an invitation in my own prayer life. Stephen, would you consider the priesthood? I never felt like I had to be. I never felt like Jesus was saying, you must be. And I also never felt like if I chose not to be, that the Lord would punish me. And that has to be the case, because it's an invitation, not a demand. It's an invitation to something good that the Lord knows will be good for me, but I was free to say no. So when we talk about vocations, the first thing for us to really see is that it's an invitation from the Lord, always. The second takeaway is Christ as the Good Shepherd is Jesus knows us better than we know ourselves. In our gospel, we hear him say, I know each of my sheep, I call them by name. Jesus knows each and every one of us intimately. He knows us. He knows everything about us. He knows our goodness. He knows our failures. He knows our sins. He knows everything. He knows us better than we know ourselves. And again, the same was true in my experience as I discerned the priesthood. For many years before I even thought about being a priest, I kind of knew in general what I wanted. I kind of knew my desires. Number one is I knew I wanted to help people. I knew I wanted to help people in life. The second thing I knew is I wanted to teach. Now, at the time, I wanted to teach math, which is very different than this. But the other desire was that I wanted to be a father. And when I went to the seminary, what blew my mind in a very good way was seeing how the Lord was going to fulfill every one of those desires in the priesthood. So helping people. Well, I see that, and that desire is fulfilled in the confessional. When I see God's transforming grace at work, and I see someone being healed by the power and grace of the sacrament. Not because of me, but because of what God is doing. Teaching, well, one of the things I didn't know that I would love, which I do, I love preaching. I love to be able to teach the faith. I love to tell you how much you are loved, because it's true. My life was changed when I first realized how much God loved me. And so my main goal in life is that you know how loved you are. And then the third one, I joked at the last Mass, it's like, you're my people. And I don't mean that as in you're my possession, in no way. What I mean is you're my family. And so I feel like the fatherhoodness, the spiritual father as a priest, it's a beautiful thing. And I emphasize all these things to show Jesus knew me. He knew what I would love to do. He knew I would love being a priest. And so when he calls us to something, it's because he knows us. He knows we're meant for it. The third takeaway for Jesus as shepherd is Jesus calls us to follow him. Now, this is another way in which Jesus is different than normal shepherds, because normal shepherds traditionally are behind their sheep. They're pushing their sheep forward. They're giving them voice commands. And then they use their staff to kind of watch for sheep that are going out of line, and they bring them back into the flock. But Jesus as shepherd in our gospel today says, I will not be behind them. I'll be in front of them, and I will lead them. And why is this important? Because Jesus never asks us to do something that he will not do himself first. That call to discipleship, if you want to be my disciple, you must deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. Well, there it is. Jesus did it first. He shows us how to do it. For you and me both, for priesthood, there are days that are hard. For married couples, there are days that are hard. There is no love without sacrifice. So the cost of discipleship means that we must follow even in the hard days. But the other part of this that is really important for all of us to consider is to follow Jesus means we must be members of his flock. Here's what I mean. There are many people that think this: I'll follow Jesus only. I don't need to be a part of a church. I just love Jesus. Well, that doesn't work, because Jesus is the shepherd, and if he's the shepherd, he has a flock, and the flock is the church. If we want to really follow Christ, we have to be members of his church. That's what it means to be a follower of the shepherd. The final takeaway, this is the most important one. It's the one that I hope we all believe in our gospel today. I came so that you might have life and have it abundantly. One of the things that I think is a reason why we struggle somewhat with vocations to the priesthood and religious life and religious sisters is this. I think there's this mentality out there from people: you can't be happy as a priest. You can't be happy as a religious sister. And I can tell you right now, there can be nothing further from the truth. But we have to believe that following Jesus can bring life of abundance. Here's what I love about the Gospel of John. That word abundance comes up over and over and over again. In John chapter 2, with the wedding feast at Cana, you have the miracle where he turns water into wine. If it was wine into water, that wouldn't be good. It was water into wine. But notice it's like 20 to 30 gallons of wine in each jar. I want to be at that wedding. Hoo-ah. That's a lot of wine. And then in John chapter 6, when he multiplies the loaves and the fish to feed the thousands that are gathered before him, when he gets done feeding them with his apostles helping him, there's 12 wicker baskets full left over. Again, there's an abundance of Christ's grace, of what it does in our lives. So when Jesus says, I want you to have life and have it abundantly, it's so that we can experience all of our interior desires and longings that are fulfilled. See, when Jesus says, I want you to have life and have it abundantly, it's not this weird prosperity gospel thing where if you follow me, I'll make you wealthy. That's not a thing. That's not what we believe. That's heresy. What we do believe, though, is following Jesus can lead to joy, peace, fulfillment. That's what Jesus means by having an abundant life through him. And that's what he calls us to. See, we think it'd be pretty cool to be drafted in the NFL, but it's way cooler to be called by God. And that's true for you and me. Each and every one of us here has been called by God to a particular vocation, some in the married vocation, some priesthood, and yes, some in religious life. And when God calls you to this thing, to this vocation, it's because he sees your goodness. But even more, it's because he sees how happy you will be and fulfilled in that life. But here's the reality. We need to pray for vocations. For the first time in years, our bishop is putting a newly ordained priest that will be ordained in June in a parish as an administrator without being an associate pastor first. I have to tell you, that would have terrified me. But why is Bishop doing that? It's not because he likes to do it. It's simply this: there are too many empty seats with not enough priests. We need more priests. And so I just encourage you to not only pray for priests, but to encourage people, to encourage them to consider it, because it's a great life. And one of the things that's important for us to believe when we encourage it is to say, I know you will be fulfilled. And I see in you someone who could be a great priest. So let's pray that the master will send laborers for the harvest, because the need is great and we need more priests in our diocese.